campaign here in the United States now, heading towards 20 years, that is unprecedented. Usually the upturns and downturns in the U.S. economy allows moments of acceptance of immigrants, or at least a neutral feeling towards immigrants. But what we've seen in the last 20 years is something quite unique. Now, some history, some background. One of the things when we think of U.S. and Mexican relations since 1848, we have to understand what were the changes between the two countries that bring us to the contemporary situation. And for myself, looking at both the politics and the economy of the U.S. and Mexico, we do have to look at a very unique instance of our U.S. history in the 1880s, and that is the campaign against Chinese labor. Chinese laborers were the labor workforce of the Western United States. You have to remember, as the Western states were annexed to the United States, a major debate in all the Western territories was who would be the cheap labor. Since Native Americans were deemed an enemy population, they could not be the cheap labor, though they were indentured in many cases, especially here in California. In fact, young Native Americans here in the state of California could be enslaved, which occurred frequently, and it was very legal. Now, the other issue was the entrance of free African Americans into the Western states, and unanimously, both sides, whether you were conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, the belief was that African Americans were not a desired workforce for the Western states. So that desired workforce was Chinese labor. But by the 1880s, and the majority of the work and labor done by the Chinese, once that was done, we begin to see anti-Chinese sentiment and anti-Asian sentiment. And so by the 1880s, we start passing Chinese exclusion laws, anti-Asian immigration laws. And basically what the U.S. did was, as we always do, shot themselves in the foot because they eliminated and choked off our supply of cheap labor. And it is at this point where we begin to see, by 1848 through the 1880s, the slow erosion of Mexicano, Mexican-American political power throughout the Southwest. So that after 1848, it was still routine to have Mexican-Americans on city councils, in U.S. representative offices. But by the 1880s, we began to see that erode. And by the 1880s, and with the exclusion of Asian cheap labor, Mexico and Latin Americans in general become the cheap labor source for the United States. So not only are the laborers who actually cross the U.S.-Mexico border our cheap labor, but technically labor that exists in Latin America is also the United States' cheap labor. And we cannot forget that, so that it's not just those immigrants who come to the U.S., but the laboring forces who are doing plantation labor, who are developing and removing everything in terms of resources such as not only foodstuff, but also rubber, wood, etc. Those laborers are also producing for the U.S. economy. And I think it is very wrong of us to only look at the last 10, 15 years. So my concluding remarks here is, if we are going to address the issue of immigration, and I always defer from using the word problem, because it's not a problem, it is inherently part of the U.S. economy. Immigrant labor, cheap labor, whatever you want to call it, is part of our U.S. economy. And again, whether or not the workers are based here in the U.S., or if they're in the third world, in the Caribbean, Latin America, etc., they are part of the U.S. global economy. And that is, we have to come up with a permanent fix. My main fear in the current discussion of immigration reform is that we're going to come up with another quick solution like we did in the 1980s with Huerta. That is, those people who are already here are the guidelines, here's your path to citizenship, and then 20 years we're going to be in the same situation again. I think we need a permanent, realistic fix to the fact that we are in a global economy. How do we do this? How do we address this problem? I think that's one of the issues that we all should leave here with, in terms of how do we permanently fix this issue so that we do not come back 20, 30 years ago when some of the dreamers who are in this room as senior citizens, I think it would be a nightmare to have you be in the same situation 40, 50 years down the road. And I think that is one of the last things that I'd like to leave the audience here today.
Hi everybody, how's everybody doing today? Good. All right, to kind of follow to what the professor mentioned here, as an anthropologist and most as an archaeologist, you kind of have a neat perspective about this. And I see everything as a system. And to me, I want to use this example because it's probably one of the best examples that you can find in the literature when it comes to immigration, both legal and illegal, and kind of complements what the professor mentioned about the labor system and how it works. One of the best examples is NAFTA, for example. To me, NAFTA is good on paper. Capitalism is not necessarily bad. However, what NAFTA produced is an increase in illegal immigration because those laborers in Mexico cannot compete with the subsidies in this country. So in that account, that kind of complements what I was mentioned before about the labor of the United States is still the labor in Mexico right now. And not just in Mexico, but in other countries. And to me, that's a matter of responsibility, not just from the United States, but from Mexico and other South American countries, to kind of look at this issue not anymore on a temporary solution, but it has to be something transnational, because that's what the economy is calling for. So we want to have responsible economics. We have to look at how it affects people at an international level. From my own experience, it doesn't help colleagues working inside of the border, laborers, Mexicans. Yeah, there's more jobs going over there because of NAFTA. However, those jobs aren't paying what they're supposed to be paying. So basically what it is creating almost a culture of poverty where you might have a job, but you're not going to make enough on that job to make the kind of money to survive. And then here, you have those products that are being produced down in Mexico and South America that are produced very cheaply, but then you come here and they sell very expensive. And the reality is that in this country, I think that the responsibility has to come from the government and also in a way from us too, because we have to become aware of how we judge the problem. And to me, it's more of a transnational thing, and I think the policies addressing immigration cannot be longer about, Latinos are invading the country, because there's never been an invasion at all. Immigrants have always been coming here. That's just ignorance, because people get fed this rhetoric, but they don't understand how the economics and the politics work, and that creates fear. And to me, I think that to solve the problem for everybody of us is that not just the United States, but other countries have to address this issue from a labor perspective. And as you mentioned, a temporary solution doesn't work because it's only addressing one area of the population. It's not addressing the industry, it's not addressing agriculture, it's not addressing people that live in indigenous communities, for example. And I think that from my perspective, that's what needs to be addressed, and in order to create a more permanent solution. It seems an impossible thing to do, but it's not really if you really work in the system closely to the people that develop the laws. And I just want to start with that for now.